The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian.
Welcome to the HR Stories episode 100, where there are lessons in every story, and apparently in over 100 episodes.
Sit back, listen, learn, and act. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.
Such nice,
Welcome to the HR
music.
Stories podcast, where every story has a lesson to teach. The story this week is The Gridlock Buster and the Job Posting Not Followed. My name is John Thalheimer.
And I am Chuck Simikian.
Good morning, Chuck. I am so excited about this.
What do you think, Chuck? That was it from 100 in our first episode.
I am Chuck Simikian. That's great. You know, it just seems like yesterday, but how long has it been? How long has it been?
That episode, I went back and checked the archives. That episode was released August 25th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Right? And it started us on this amazing journey of helping others get better at HR, but also at the same time, I learned a lot from doing this show with you, Chuck, and kind of diving in and getting into the details and really learning about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I've learned it's the interesting thing is doing this podcast has allowed me to have some sort of internal guru status. Like, it gives me confidence because we talk about some of these things so often, and we talk about these stories so often that when I'm talking to HR people or people at work and there's a situation, it triggers. Yes, I get triggered, John. And I remember something we talked about, a story we had, and it has helped me in my role as an HR director, and has helped me in my role as an HR consultant.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think one of the things, especially when I'm training HR people, I flash back to episodes and I'm like, oh yeah, there was this story, blah, blah, blah. And I'll go in, describe the story and give them the lesson. And then we can have that conversation about that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I think you've told me this before. One of the things that you've learned is that HR is not black and white, right?
Yeah.
HR professionals, managers, we kind of live in that gray area, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think that gray area, I said that on one of the episodes, and I think what happens is a lot of times when we're first getting into HR, we're dealing with HR for the first time, we think it's black and white, and there are a lot of things that are black and white. But there's also what makes HR a necessity at every organization is the gray areas. And I think we do a good job on this podcast, not to pat ourselves on the back, pat, about breaking those gray areas down and going, okay, here's the decisions you can make. Here's where you need to be concerned.
Yeah. And so I just want to say that first episode, The Gridlock Buster, folks, get a chance, go listen to it. The best thing about that episode that I would say, which got a juxtaposition to where we are today, is that that episode was 100% scripted, and you could hear us, John, just literally talking the script. Hello, John. I am great. How are you? This is the story of the Gridlock Buster. Ha ha ha. Chuck laughs here, and I just think it's great stuff to hear how we have morphed over the years. So
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know, just
a
want to
lot
bring
more
that up.
confidence in what we're talking about, and a lot more able to know. Like, I'm much more comfortable knowing where you may go where I say something, right? Yeah, he may go over here. I'm going to be prepared for that. And I think you also feel that now as well, which I know at the beginning was like, where's John going? He could go anywhere. And so I think you're much more comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's been fun going back, listening to the different stories. And folks, that's what we're going to do today. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone, we do have a book out there, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, which has come out of John and I's friendship and partnership throughout the years here on the HR Stories podcast. So you definitely want to go to Ultimate Guide to HR.com. That's Ultimate Guide to HR.com. Check it out. It is getting rave reviews. We give you the answers, and we help you get HR right. But getting back to the podcast stuff, you and I have had fun with titles, with the titles like Baby Bump and Dump. That was an episode of a title about pregnancy discrimination, or that Temper Tantrum Tom, about Tom Cruise, profanity and yelling at your employees in the workplace.
Yeah, I love that episode. I love that we decided to go with that episode. And we talked about, so what we talked about in that episode was when Tom Cruise yelled and screamed at his production team because they were not following COVID-19 protocols. And so what makes this different than it was that Tom not only was an actor on the set, but he was an executive producer,
right?
i.e. the employer, and this was his project, and this was his employees. And so we went in there and kind of dove into that, and like, can you as an employer yell? What does that do? How do you kind of develop some of that stuff in there? So I thought it was a good episode to kind of cover in there.
Yeah, you got to listen, folks, because we actually play the temper tantrum of Tom Cruise breaking down. But John, what do you think the lesson ultimately was from that show?
Yeah, I think one, don't let the method of communication ruin the message. By that, I mean, his message was probably really important to be heard. Mm-hmm. And he probably didn't feel that people were listening to him, and he felt the only way he could get that message across was by yelling. So yeah. I think that's really, to me, that's the lesson, is don't let the method ruin it, right? How more important would it have been, or how much more powerful would it have been if he called all the crew in, called everybody in, and pulled them into a room, walked up in front of all of them, and didn't say anything for 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think it's just a kind of powerful message. I also love that we went into the details about what an organization should do to protect their employees in times of crisis. We literally broke that down, not only about COVID, but all the other things in there as well.
Yeah, it is fun how we take some of these stories and we kind of we throw them around and bundle them up and repackage them and get them out to you, our listeners, so we help you not make the same mistakes. John, I know you're excited to go into statistics, but I just want to throw out a few more of my favorite episode titles, and then I want to hear your statistics. Okay.
All right. Tell them up.
I love this one. And this actually, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these, but are you wearing shorter skirts yet? I thought that was a great title, and that was one of the original Supreme Court cases, Ehlers versus Burlington Industries. How about this one? But boss, I need to go to the bathroom. And that was a story on reasonable accommodations. And I really like, and Samantha, our producer, and I'm giving her the core, giving her producer, because she says, well, I'm just your editor. Yes. Okay, Sam, please. I get it, but you say that, but we think of you as our producer. You do great screenshots of us. You produce this show, put it out there, and you came up with this about harassment, a dish best never served. So, and then of course, John, there's your story, which was the most shocking title. I'm going to run over you with this forklift.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty intense tale of sexual harassment. So enough of the glitter and glamour. Let's get into the deep down statistics.
All right. So Chuck, here's my question for you. How many episodes do you think we've recorded and produced?
John, come on. I'm talking about it from the beginning. Episode 100. Well, yeah, right. Episode 100 episodes. Are you going to tell me there's an episode 0 and that counted as one? So this is really episode 101.
No, this is actually 112 as of this recording.
Who's doing this math?
Yeah.
Samantha, get in here.
Here's the thing. It's not Samantha's fault. We did numerous special episodes along the way. And so if you go to our podcast, if you go to Apple or all there, and you count all the episodes up, it's 112. But when we numbered them, when we counted them, we counted this as our 100th episode.
Yes. Okay. I still don't get it, but yay for 100 episodes. Woo!
Right. It's 100 episodes, which is a lot, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, this was, I do want to share, and you gave me some of these stats. So there have been in those episodes, 100, 112, 30,000 downloads of our podcast, John, and it's reached over 2,390 cities. I think that's amazing that we're able to actually get that information, but it is there. It is there.
Yeah, and what I love about this is that not only have we been heard or downloaded, as the kids say these days, downloaded and heard in every single state in this great nation of ours, but we also have listeners in Canada, Sweden, Germany, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, and many, many, many others.
International podcasters, folks. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it is, right? We're international podcasters. It's going on my wall after this episode. I'm putting it up. I'm going to put it on my LinkedIn thing. International podcaster. And so, Chuck, I want to know from you, what's your favorite episode?
Well, I can tell you what my most unfavorite episode was. Maybe the worst episode is where I was in a rush and I ate some dinner real quickly. I sat down, started recording. I thought it was a great episode. And then I saw when it was launched, and you never told me this, and no one caught it. I don't know why, but I had a piece of food left over on my face. Folks, you have to check out our YouTube channel to see us in action if you want to see what we look like and how we interact together and how our facial expressions are. But yeah, food on my face.
Yeah, and I will call out Samantha again, Sam, because she's the one that really works to get the YouTube channel going, make sure things are on there, make sure we're doing it the right way. So listen, I'm not going to mention which episode that was, episode 77. And I did not say anything because I got to be honest, Chuck, I didn't notice because I would have said something. But that's hilarious that you
on my lip.
The whole episode, and it wasn't, I think, till the next day when you're just checking it out. You're like, oh.
Yeah. I think it was a crouton. Who knows what, But I think my favorite episode was probably breaking legal barriers. The part-time secretary who rewrote harassment laws. And we recorded it in January, late January of this year. And in it, we featured the story of Sherry Minarski. And she took a brave stand against workplace harassment. And in that episode, we revealed that Sherry's struggle as a secretary in the Susquehanna County Department of Veterans Affairs, that's in Pennsylvania, okay, where she endured years of harassment in silence due to fear and isolation. So her story unfolded pretty much as well, I thought it was a gripping narrative, tell you the truth, of resilience and courage. And ultimately, it became a groundbreaking legal battle that challenged these conventional norms of workplace legal responsibilities. And that's a lot. That's a lot there, but that's probably one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, and listeners, if you get a chance, go back and listen to that episode. Chuck did a really good job about bringing that story to life and what we need to be doing and what we need to be, how do we need to be handling. Chuck, what do you think the lesson was in that story?
Yeah, well, first you have to stand up for what is right in the office place. You have to stand up. I've heard, there was and maybe we should talk more about this at some other time, but there's this thing goes around the office where, I don't want to throw someone under the rug, but I don't want to throw so people don't stand up sometimes for what is right. And the lesson here is you got to stand up for what is right in the office place and not worry about throwing someone under the rug. You're there to do what you need to do as a job, as a role. But secondly, the critical lesson for leaders and HR professionals is the importance of creating that supportive work environment and the impact of empathy and proactive action, like proactive, rather than reactive and rather than no action, I guess, in combating workplace harassment.
Yeah, I think it was such an important lesson. It was a good reminder for all of us. I think you said it right. We have to be proactive. We have to do something about it. And I know it's hard, right? It's not an easy thing to do, especially depending on where you live. That job, you could be part of your community. It could be there's not any other jobs out there, but really standing up for yourself is important. And so I think that's good. So Chuck, when I start thinking about my favorite episodes, and I think you kind of probably know which ones are my favorite episodes, it's when we talk directly to the employees about the rights they have in the workplace, right? And so in the fall of 2023, we did 2 episodes, and they were called We Are All Employees, Part 1 and Part 2, where we broke down employees' rights all managers and HR professionals need to know.
Yeah, and you are pretty passionate about that, making sure employee rights aren't forgotten in all we do. And when you do that, you're still giving a lesson to HR professionals and managers out there. So it's a dual thing.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think one of the things that I always want to stress is that we cannot forget HR professionals, that we are employees too, right? And yes, we're agents of the company, but we are employees as well. And so we need to manage that. We need to make sure that we're doing that well. And then I think the second lesson here is it's a good reminder to all of our fellow employees that they have rights and should hold the organization and leaders to a high standard when it comes to their rights. And I think we need to make sure they understand that when we're talking to them in orientation. We should be talking about them. Hey, these are your rights. We're going to protect these rights. We want you to hold us to that high standard as well.
Yeah, that's great. And there's good lessons there. I also love our Q&A, our question and answer episodes. And if I calculate this right, we've answered over 100 questions from our listeners, starting with our first Q&A episode back in June of 2023, which I can't believe it. It's yeah. So, but in that episode, we respond to questions like how to deal with an employee who refuses to work alone with a member of the opposite sex. I always thought that was still one of my favorite and most interesting questions. And that person was citing religious convictions and regarding working with someone of the opposite sex. And then the other question we had was whether an exempt employee can be switched to become a non-exempt employee.
Yeah, and I love those question and answer episodes. And they kind of came out of people were asking us a lot of questions, and we're like, well, we can do these individually or we can send them out. There's so many lessons to be given when people are asking questions. So definitely, if you haven't, make sure that you're sending us your questions because we'd love to answer them. We'll try to answer them privately if that's what you need. No worries. But we're trying to help you be better at the HR responsibilities, the employee experience on there. Chuck, thinking about all those questions, we answered what takeaway, what lesson, overall lesson do you think there is?
Oh, that's tough. There's so many diverse questions on a variety of topics. I think the lesson is that we aren't, maybe that we're not on islands by ourselves. We're not alone on our journey to be better at HR, whether we're an HR professional, a small business owner, or just a general HR practitioner. Having these questions is normal, and asking for guidance and getting guidance and the right answers is critical for our success.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. And I'm thinking about my career when I was in corporate America, or when I was a manager and leader, or when I was working in HR. I think I did not do a good job about asking for that guidance because I thought it was wrong. I thought I needed to know everything. And so I wasn't willing to go, hey, I don't know how to deal with this situation. I have questions about that. And I think about all those colleagues, Chuck, that have helped us along the way, right? And so we kind of take all that wisdom that we're giving and we kind of pass it on, right? And so kind of doing that, I think, becomes really important. So is it time for our big announcement? The big announcement about upcoming 2025 shows.
That, yes.
So do you want to do it? You want me to do it?
Sure. Okay. So yes, it's very exciting. Okay. So starting in early 2025, we are going to begin having on-air guests on our podcast. We have hundreds of questions, and we just thought it'd be fun to talk to experts and share their wisdom with you. Experts have stories, people have stories to share, so we want to hear those stories.
Yeah, I think that was nicely said, Chuck. I'm excited too. I think it's going to be great. Chuck and I have strong opinions and that kind of stuff, but I feel, maybe Chuck doesn't feel this way, but I feel there's gaps in my knowledge, and I want to bring on those experts that can help me with those gaps. We're going to try to bring people on about learning and development, dressing for the office. How do we dress? What does it say about us? Diversity, inclusion, equity, and so many more topics. We have people that want to be on here. We've kind of been pushing them back. Well, we're not doing that yet. We're going to let that floodgate open up in the beginning of the year and hopefully answer a lot of your questions. Right? We're going to dive into some really tough topics and kind of get those answers on there.
Yeah, and I think adding those guests are going to be key to keeping things interesting, every once in a while. So, so John, what episode do you think had the biggest impact on you? Impact.
Yeah, so I think there were two. The first one I use all the time when I'm training managers, when I'm training HR professionals, because it discusses a term or a concept called constructive discharge.
Sure.
And so it's titled Racism in the Kitchen, and it's about Gabrielle, who experienced frequent harassment in the workplace. He was a gay black man and was constantly called the N-word, Additionally, his coworkers made inappropriate jokes about his sexual orientation, even making comments about dildos. One worker consistently wore a hat with a Confederate flag on it, which, as we all know, has been banned from all U.S. military installations as an emblem of white supremacy. He complained, so Gabrielle complained to his supervisor, who didn't handle it well, telling Gabrielle, oh, they're just joking, relax, go back to work. So Gabrielle then takes his complaints and goes to the leadership group and goes, look, this is what's happening. The leadership group did seem receptive, but he goes back to work and his schedule goes from working 50 to 60 hours to 20 to 30 hours to 0 hours. And so then he didn't have any time left on this schedule.
Oh, sure. Yes, constructive discharge. Gosh darn it. I remember that story. And that's when an employee is forced to resign by the organization's actions. In other words, they make their life so bad, their work life so bad and so impossible to do their job that the employee just basically resigns. The organization constructs a situation, and that's where the term constructive discharge comes from. And in this case, they took away his hours so he could no longer earn a living because he complained about being harassed in the workplace. And I'll ask you, it had an impact on you. What do you think the lesson was?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm pretty sure that was your story. I think it was your story that you told, but I just remember it so well, and it made it really vivid in my mind. But there's a common theme, and this is a common theme we discussed probably on a lot of our episodes, but you have to train your managers and supervisors. You have to train your managers and supervisors about these type of situations and how to properly handle them if you want your organization to be successful. And more importantly, if you want your organization to be compliant. And I spend a lot of time in my trainings talking about the process of, as HR professionals, we have a lot of inputs that we're getting, right? We have a lot of inputs that we're getting. And if those inputs are not done properly, our outputs, our compliance with the company, with the employment laws is not going to be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. But you did say you have another story.
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry. I had to get some water. Yeah, so and it was our first full episode of 2024. And it was called Failure to Follow Direction Leads to an Employee Death.
Yes, and that was a shocking title too. That was a pretty shocking title.
It was a shocking story.
Yeah.
Right? And so
you got emotional. That was tough.
I did. I was emotional. I was emotional when I was thinking about it, when I was writing it down and doing that stuff. But even in saying it, I was emotional. Because here's what happened. If you don't remember, there was this is up in Wisconsin, I think. And there was a lumber mill which had been cited by OSHA. So one of the employees there lost their toes. Mm-hmm. Right? They lost their toes. And so OSHA comes in and does this big investigation and tells them, here's the things that you need to do to mitigate the dangers in your occupation, right? Told the business owner, told them that there. A couple of years goes by, and there is a young man who's going into his senior year of high school, and he's working with his dad. He comes in every summer and working with his dad, and that same machine gets jammed up. He's working alone, and he tries to fix it, and he dies.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a really sad story, for sure.
Yeah, it is a sad story, but I mean, I think we know what the lesson there is, but if you had to sum it up, John, for everyone.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, it goes into do everything you can to protect your employees, right? Just do everything you can to protect your employees. And if OSHA comes in and tells you to fix something, fix it.
If OSHA comes in and tells you to fix something, fix it. If OSHA comes in and click your heels 3 times, if OSHA say yes, I exactly. Too many times companies fail to follow through, and they end up getting someone hurt or worse.
Yeah, and I think we've told numerous stories about this. I'm thinking now about the one where the individual dies because of heat exhaustion, and they weren't following basic OSHA guidelines.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, don't retaliate against employees just because they complain. So, look, that reminds me about the story. This always gets me. A pig's head. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Yeah, I love that story. I love that story. Can you remind our listeners what it was about?
Yeah, so there's some Godfather overtones there. You know, remember the horse head and in the bed, and I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse, right? And that's just a classic line. But basically, a couple of employees in this story complained to the Department of Labor about poor working conditions in the workplace, and ended up with a severed pig's head on their desk in retaliation for coming forward.
Yeah, right. And so as you think about that story, Chuck, what do you think the lesson was?
Oh, geez. I think it's we as HR professionals, and I guess I'll add managers into there too. We are agents of the company, as you said earlier, and we represent the company in all our actions, and what we do matters, but both positively and negatively. So what we do is extremely impactful, and so you have to make, well, good choices.
Yeah, I mean, right. We have to make good choices, and we have to do right. Our job is to make sure we're being compliant, right? That's one of our jobs, but we have to do that in protecting the employees as well as the employer, kind of getting out there. As I kind of look, as I went through a lot of the episodes, Chuck, and I was kind of looking back and reminiscing and that kind of stuff, I was reminded of those episodes that you titled the Supreme Court cases that changed HR.
Yes.
These were powerful cases and ones that HR professionals need to know because they need to know how we got to where we are.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I love that occasionally we go back, we look at cases which changed HR. Schools, colleges, certification groups, they all study these cases because they really were a baseline for a lot of the laws we have here. And to break those down, it really helps put things in perspective.
And I think it helps me when you do that to better understand. Oh, that's why. Oh, that's how we okay, that makes more sense. Do you have a favorite of those episodes that we do?
Well, I know our listeners do, and this is crazy, and I don't know why, but our most downloaded episode was titled, "I Want to Go to Bed with You," said her boss. And that was the Meritor Savings versus Vinson, which was the original sexual harassment court case.
It might have been the title. Why people downloaded it.
You think what, like Meritor Savings Bank versus Vinson?
Maybe the "I want to go to bed with you," said her boss.
Yeah. Hey, a little clickbait, but you know what? That's what happened. I want to go to bed with you. I want to sleep with you.
Can you give us a quick recap?
Yeah.
What happened in that case and why it was so important?
So in this episode, there's a 19-year-old bank teller, and she was coerced into having a sexual relationship with her boss, who was older much older, I guess, in order to save her job. She's 19, and her boss, I don't know who knows how old he was at this time. And I believe, John, after researching all these cases, these people are still alive. These people are still alive. And his name was Mr. Sidney Taylor. It was May of 1975. He may not be around with us anymore, but I know over the years he was still around. He was a branch manager at a local bank, and he takes this employee, her name is Michelle Vinson, out to dinner at a Chinese restaurant after work. Years later, Michelle recollected the story about the Chinese restaurant dinner with the Washington Post. So she was doing interviews. And in her own words, she says, I don't want to go to bed with you. And he says, I'm going to go to bed with you. She's like, well, I don't want to go to bed with you. And he says, just like I hired you, I'll fire you. And just like I made you, I'll break you. And if you don't do what I say, then I'll have you killed. And that's how it started. And that's 1975.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's one of those cases that redefined sexual harassment in the workplace. And the court in 1970, whenever that happened, that it was in the 70s, right? So mid-70s, 75, 76. They ruled unanimously a 9-0 that sexual harassment that results in a hostile work environment is a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans sexual discrimination by employers. And the court also established criteria for judging these types of claims.
So what do you think the lesson was from that particular case?
Well, first, don't be an asshole. I mean, for goodness sakes, if you don't do it, I'll kill you. I mean, who says that stuff? I mean, really? Were they saying that in 1970? I don't know. 75? Say, maybe, I guess. I don't know.
They were, obviously.
Obviously, and she was afraid and she was listening. And there's so much more to that story, John, how she told a friend of hers, a confidant. I mean, just so much, the bank vault, the downstairs, the trysts they were having. But yeah, discrimination overall is wrong in its many forms. And HR professionals have to do a good job explaining to leaders what is sexual harassment and what is not.
Yeah, and maybe that's today's theme, right? That HR is responsible for training our managers and supervisors and leaders to get HR right, to do HR right. And sometimes that's walking them through. I believe strongly in HR training, in employee law compliance, and supervisor and management training. But maybe it's just lunch and learns. Like, pick a subject every month. And hey, we're going to talk about sexual harassment. We're going to talk about discrimination. We're going to talk about the Fair Labor Standard Act, right? And so going through that and doing that can be in there as well.
Yeah, it sure makes our job easier. So any other episodes you want to share as we kind of turn the final pages here on our 100th-ish episode?
100 episodes. One of our early stories, and this, I forgot about this story, but you pointed it out to me, was the story of the lost employee.
Yeah, that was your story. That is all about you.
Yeah, it's literally my story, right? And I was working at, or I wasn't working, I was working, right? And so it was my first day on the job. I come in, I ask the receptionist, like, where do I go? She's like, oh, it's down the hallway by the stinky dumpster. And I start looking for my supervisor, and my supervisor isn't around, finally shows up, hands me this dusty employee handbook and goes, go to the cafeteria and look at it. And I tell this story in a lot of my classes to kind of talk about what not to do. And when I tell that story, I just hear this groan in the audience going, oh my God, why would anybody do that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fun and powerful story. Any other lessons?
Yeah. And I think it's create an orientation and onboarding process, right? For all new employees, and read that as train your managers to bring people on board properly so the employee can be successful in the workplace. you think about that moment, right? You think about that moment when employees are coming in to your organization. They're working in a new environment. They're working with new people. They have new responsibilities. They're not going to know how to do all that stuff on day one. You have to get them there.
Yeah, agreed. And if you don't have a process, folks, and I'll say it again, I said it earlier, you want to get our book, The Ultimate Guide to HR. We have 85 different checklists. It's focused on, all kind of things, but we have some that are focused on orientation and onboarding. And the book, our book, that it was born out of these 100-ish episodes over the years, is found at ultimateguidetohr.com, ultimateguidetohr.com.
Nice. I love that we created that guide, and that it's its own way, in its own way. It's kind of a companion piece to this podcast, right? And so it's the holiday season, and I wasn't going to let us get away with this one. I think it would be a disservice to our listeners if we didn't tell the story that happened many years ago in the Antarctica.
I think it was the Arctic.
Arctic.
Yeah,
oh, you're right.
Antarctic is down the bottom.
I always forget.
Or the top, depending on if you're flipping the world upside down, which may not really be upside down, depending on your worldview. Yes, the Arctic, the North Pole. Do you mean when Kris Kringle and Rudolph taught us an important lesson about discrimination in the workplace?
I do.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I discovered a case of discrimination that even I couldn't believe, John. And we vetted it out. We researched it. It was Rudolph and versus Kringle Incorporated. Rudolph versus Kringle Incorporated, unwrapping HR lessons at the North Pole. And we all know the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but have you ever thought about it from an HR perspective? The workplace with Rudolph was full of bullying, discrimination, and harassment. In our take on Rudolph, we discuss how Santa and his team, what they should have been doing to make sure they had a respectful workplace, because they didn't let Rudolph play in any reindeer games, and that was sanctioned by the leaders of that organization. Very passionate about it, John.
Yeah, it was discrimination, right? It was discrimination based on disability. So what's the lesson that our listeners would take away from that story?
Well, the lesson here, there's so many lessons out of that story, but even in the midst of the holiday season, we are still HR focused and need to continue to enforce our policies and look out for discrimination and anything else that could be happening on our little island that we call work.
Yeah, and bullying, right? I think that's one of the big things when you think about that story. There's a lot of bullying going on in that workplace. The other lesson I would say is that the island of misfits toys is real.
Yeah, it is, and isn't welcoming them back into the fold as regular toys, as not misfit toys, and not labeling them. That kind of fits with kind of an inclusive atmosphere and equitable and diversity, I think.
Yeah, right. It's making sure everyone feels belong. Another important lesson for sure there.
Yeah. Did we get it? Did we get it in 10 lessons from 100 episodes?
We did. We got in 10 lessons from different there. I've been counting. I think there was 10 plus a few others. We kind of threw them in there. So kind of thinking about this, Chuck, what has been your lesson over the last 4 years? 100 episodes, over 30,000 downloads. What has been in? What's been your insight? One thing that you would take away from that?
Well, I love HR, so you don't have to. And I don't mean you, but I'm talking about, I love digging into the minutia of these stories. That has really gassed me to find like something that no one's uncovered regarding a story, details and digging into the court cases. And so that's been my insight, is that I found that I really love that stuff. What about yours?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we need to do 100 more episodes. If that, I was going to point it in there, but I agree with you that I love trying to answer how do we improve the employee experience. Mm-hmm. Really, that's my focus. How do we do that? And I'm trying to get managers to do that, HR professionals. How do we improve that employee experience? And listening to the stories that are out there, sharing the wisdom from researchers and studies. And we're going to be doing on-air guests, which are going to be great because now we're going to get in their stories and kind of figuring that out as well. So that's my insight, I think.
John, I think it's time for us to sign off here. And our first episode 1, we had a different sign off than we ever did before. And you probably don't know this, but I went back, and I know we always like to sign off. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. And so I thought we could go ahead and sign off with your original version of that, which we never used again, but hey, we did it. Okay. So anything else before I sign off with your original sign off version from episode 1?
Well, the one thing I will say before you do that is Chuck and I both love to interact with our listeners. We want this to be more than us talking. We want to hear from you. We want to get that information. So a couple things. Find us on LinkedIn. Make sure link us up, right? Go link on LinkedIn. Go to our Facebook group, HR Community of One. You can text us directly from the description. Wherever you get your podcast, you'll see a little text us. Send us a text that comes in there. We will do our best to answer you. We pretty much get back probably within a couple days. And so we will do that as well. And then lastly, don't forget to get the Ultimate Guide to HR. Checklist Edition is a wonderful guide to have on your desktop to help you be better at HR.
Yeah. And thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where every story has a lesson to teach. And that's how you signed off our first episode all those 4 years ago.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.